Hi guys, what's going on? Welcome to the Stack Strength podcast. I'm your host Daniel DeBrocke, and today we've got a new guest, Holly Baxter. So Holly, thank you so much for jumping on. Is it Holly Baxter-Norton, or are you still going by Holly Baxter? Sorry.
I hate this question. It's so frustrating. So I'm actually Holly Norton based on my
Okay.
marriage certificates. But,
Yeah.
when you kind of get to a certain presence on social media, then changing everything really sucks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for your
Well, that's
purpose,
kind of why I figured, right? Like I wanted to, I wanted to clarify that.
I'm Holly Baxter for anybody that needs to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Exactly. Awesome. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about finding balance, within your fitness goals. And I think this is something really important that, a lot of people sort of gloss over. We have these sort of like nebulous kind of statements, like, if you want it, you're going to do it. And then like, on the other hand, there's a lot of coddling. And so I think this is going to be a really productive conversation. But for people who aren't familiar with you and your background, can you give just a little bit of an introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I will say on the front end, to make it nice and simple, I am a fitness nutrition influencer. So everything that I'm involved in, from one-on-one coaching to our nutrition coaching app, our programming app, coaching team, it's all supported by evidence. So very much into the science. My background is a BS in food science and nutrition, and then I have a master's in dietetics. So those degrees have really taken me through quite the roller coaster of careers, and it now means that I am spread very thin in lots of different areas of health. So I'm always very excited because I have lots of projects going on.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So in terms of, I guess we can kind of start off the conversation by what got you involved in the fitness space in general, and then I guess sort of how has that evolved and what keeps you engaged in the process right now?
Yeah, so I haven't always been like super interested in bodybuilding, which is kind of interesting considering where I'm at now and having spent the last 7 years of my life in the sport. I was definitely sporty growing up. I did track athletics, basketball. I think we were in just about every sport that you could be in as a female in Australia. And I think I kind of got to the end of year 12 and was deciding like, hey, what do I want to do with my life? And unfortunately, in Australia, there aren't really a whole lot of opportunities for women to, have a career in sport. And I guess my idea about, what does success look like? It's, a pretty high standard for myself. So I didn't really want to pursue something that wasn't going to be, the potential for a lifelong career. So I decided that the academic route was really the best place for me to invest my time. So I guess went through, did all of my degrees and started working and had my own practice. And it wasn't until probably 2 or 3 years into having, I guess, a clinical practice for dietetics, I started working with a lot more professional athletes. And it was on the advice of a client that I was actually coaching at the time to compete, who said, hey, you should really get into this sport. Like, this is kind of what you coach me on, and you seem very fit. Have you considered it? And I kind of thought about it, and it was really difficult at the time to kind of stay present in like team sports and some of the other, I guess, hobbies that I had, because I was so busy, still learning, still, I guess, certifying, getting extra credentials, and then trying to have my practice, that I couldn't do, specific set times. So I was still very active, but I was in the gym always, or trying to find some time for exercise. And she actually let me know that the World Championships for INBA, which is, I guess, one of the natural bodybuilding federations in Australia, that the World Champs were going to be held in Dubai later that year. And it was one of the countries that I'd always, really wanted to visit. And I thought, what a great excuse for a bit of a holiday after. So I had to go through like the state championships, nationals, win and place top 3 at both of those events to compete for Australia. And I did it. So that kind of kicked me off into the bodybuilding space. And I think during that time, like my passion and desire to learn more about, the intricate details and the science behind modifying your body composition really just grew. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Well, kicking off your career by competing at Worlds within your first years is not it's not bad.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome experience, to be honest.
Yeah, that's hilarious actually. So I've got a handful of lifters, so powerlifters, competitive powerlifters who same thing, like their first year, they're just like these little girls and they're so strong. And they compete, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, you just broke a national record, and they're like, oh, that's good? I'm like, what? They're like, they're girls, and they're like, oh, this is cool. Like, can I come back next year? And I'm like, yeah, you got second. It's like you've been training for like 9 months. Like, you're a freak, you know?
That's awesome. Hidden talent.
Yeah, exactly. So this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about as well, is sort of like discussing a little bit about your perspective on how you establish balance, because obviously balance is going to be, very different. It's not like you're, dedicating X amount of time to your family and then an equivocal amount of time to all of your other priorities. So there's obviously got to be a little bit more of an extreme, since you are kind of an athlete and a competitor at a high level. And so how do you establish that balance, and then how do you navigate sort of fluctuations in your life, and how has that sort of changed, or how has your perspective on establishing and maintaining balance changed over the years?
Man, yeah, there's so much to unpack there. Do we have more than an hour?
Yeah, exactly, right?
So straight up, I'm just going to say, looking back over the last 10 years of my career, where, yes, I have gotten to a top level. I've won multiple world championships. Yes, I have shifted into business and have multiple companies. And now recently I have 2 children, stepkids, through my latest, or my only marriage, rather, not my latest.
I'm somewhat of a collector.
Yeah, I collect these marriages going, oh my gosh, I clearly need to have another cup of coffee. So I think I definitely would call myself an extremist. And I think to get to the top level of anything, whether it is, top level, ultimate successor in business, whether it is in finances, whether it is in sport, and it can be any sport, I think there is a level or an element of, extremism for those individuals. That's really kind of what keeps pushing and driving and motivating these people to keep going. But I don't think that there is really ever like a feeling of balance. And I think balance is constantly fluxing. I think that it is like triaging your priorities. It is deciding and making very intentional decisions about when am I going to, make X a priority, and when am I going to make this other thing a priority. And for the longest time, in fact, I think when I was kind of single, young, in my early 20s, I didn't have as many responsibilities. It was just me. I wasn't, dead set on building a huge, business model. I wasn't scaling companies. I was really just kind of getting my feet wet and trying different things that I enjoyed. And I had the opportunity to be a little bit, I don't want to say selfish, I'll say selfless, in that I invested a lot of time in myself. I wanted to discover what I was truly passionate about, where did I thrive the most. And I think that because I was so invested in education and I was so invested in my bodybuilding, it did have a number of consequences. I don't think any decision, especially at that elite level, comes without, sacrifice of some sort. And the sacrifices that I personally experienced were potentially not having, a strong social network, not many supports, because I was always so busy and so on the move and so focused that it didn't enable me to develop the connections that I think I needed, growing up. It took me away from family. I moved to another state. I didn't have those close, family members around to support me. And that just in itself was a really difficult thing. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think as you get older, and you decide, hey, I'm ready to establish myself and settle down, then you do put yourself in a position where you can be a little bit lonely, and feel like, what else? But what else? What's missing from my life? So I think that it also put me in a place where I was forced to, let me think about how best to say this, forced to not get outside my comfort zone. So because it was just me, I was on my own, kind of managing maybe a housemate here or there. It put me in a position where I probably learned a lot of bad habits, and you don't get pulled up on these things. And I would say that, over time, the behaviors that I'd kind of gotten into were actually causing huge negatives in my life, or little did I know that they would. So I think I never really got uncomfortable, and it really made it hard as I developed my career and decided, hey, you know what, I am ready to switch over and start applying this to my family, and I'm ready to apply this to scaling my businesses. I didn't know how to adapt outside of the four walls that I had built and created for myself. I really struggled. It gave me anxiety. I was stressed. I felt really uncomfortable all the time when I started to have to change and grow and develop myself outside of what I knew. So, yeah, I think the idea of achieving balance is not really something that I think I've ever necessarily had. But what I have found is that over the years, as I have grown and developed and matured, and I guess decided what is a good thing for me, I've had to do a lot of work on self-development, let go of certain, character flaws, like perfectionism is a really good example, people pleasing, high achiever. There's a lot of, whilst they're great characters, they can also be such an impedance on your life in other areas. And I think they can tend to take away any element of balance. So I don't know whether I've given you a really good answer here, but I'd say it's like a pendulum. You have to be able to pivot and shift and be flexible. And it's hard if you've only ever done one thing. Like, I've got lots of friends that have been exceptional athletes, like top end pro basketballers, pro track athletes, pro baseball, football, you name it. And when they do finally retire, they have a really hard time adapting or adjusting back to a normal life where they do need a little bit more balance. So it requires a lot of, inner dialogue, lots of reflection, really working on self-awareness to be able to manage all the things that are kind of going on in life.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I think you brought up some really great points about the pendulum and being able to adapt, because I've definitely dealt with that quite a bit in my own experience, but also with a lot of my athletes. And so, you'll especially if you do have someone who's really, really type A, just dialed in, and they're used to just crushing it all the time. And then they have a kid, and now all of a sudden their schedule's thrown off, and now they're panicking. And it'll literally take me sitting down with them and having a conversation, being like, hey, instead of training 5 days a week, why don't we just train 4? And like, can I do that? And like, obviously they're aware they can do that, because a lot of my athletes are also coaches, right? And so it's not like they're unaware of that, but you just sort of get attached, exactly like you said, with this sort of identity, and it's like that's all you know how to do. And so if there is no ability to sort of adapt, or if that constant, like, hey, we need to check in once a week or whatever, if that's not sort of set and internalized for yourself, then it's very, very difficult to adapt to I guess, upcoming problems and things that emerge. And the longer that you sort of leave that, it ends up just being a lot more problematic, and problems start mounting. And then it just kind of ends up being this house of cards that collapses on you one day, and it's just like, oh, okay, now it's going to take 3 months to dig out of this thing,
Definitely.
Yeah. So one of the things that I guess I also wanted your perspective on was in terms of being a little bit more type A, being kind of a perfectionist. Obviously you had to you had to go through a lot of those difficulties in order to really understand what was actually important to you. Because, from my perspective, it's really easy to look at someone and be like, oh, they're rich, that's why they're happy. Oh, they're super fit. Oh, they're super strong, that's why they're confident, or this or that. But then once you actually get there, you're like, oh, okay, and you have a much, much different perspective on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually being able to pivot and taking some of those things and being able to apply them elsewhere. So how do you go through that process, or how did you go through that process personally of being like, hey, I've got all these really great skills that got me to a high level in this one area,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like a fish out of water elsewhere. How can I kind of translate them into these other areas of my life?
Yeah, well, just for the record, I definitely learned the hard way. It was not an easy journey. I think you can look at people, and I've got my mentors that I aspire to be like, and that I want to be more like, and I think people have this general perception that oh wow, it must come easy to them, and I just want to say it's so not like that.
Yeah.
I think some people are very proactive, and I'd say that I wasn't that for my early 20s. I'm 33 now, so it's been a little while. But I quickly learned, after spending some time with mentors, with advisors, with therapists for various different things in my life, both personally and in business, that people that succeed aren't necessarily dealing with less. They are just better equipped to handle the things that are thrown at them. So I struggled probably like every other person in my early 20s, and failed to take personal accountability, I think, for many of the struggles that I was having. Struggles in personal life, struggles in business, struggles financially. And it wasn't until I started kind of working on my foundation that things started to get better. And that usually requires taking on, I guess, that self-responsibility. And rather than looking for, people to blame or excuses, you have to start looking inwards. And I guess I went and got a mentor. I, looked at the people that I really wanted to be like when I was 25. I had business coaching. And then personal therapy. I avoided that for like the plague for many years because of, I guess, this sense of shame, and like, it was so embarrassing. And this is at this time, like, you've got to think about where you are in your career. Like, I was mid-20s, I've got 2 degrees, I have a company, I've been very successful in sport at this point, and you have this idea that, well, I should be further along in my life. Why does this still feel like it's so difficult? And how embarrassing at this age, I shouldn't have to go to somebody and ask for help. And I think, again, referring back to some of my own personal character traits, which was heavily perfectionist mindset, perfectionism in general. For everything that I did, I wanted it to be perfect, to excel, to be a high achiever. I don't do things if I'm not going to put in 100% effort. And I just didn't want to, have to deal with the feeling of embarrassment. Instead, I kind of like pushed it down and swallowed it and threw it away. And, that was the one thing that I really had to open my eyes to in order to improve and for things to change. So as soon as I started like working with a therapist to manage stress, to manage anxiety, to even realize this is what this feeling was, I used to call it like, man, I have a really hard time. If I've got a difficult task, I just procrastinate. That's what I thought it was. And, digging a little bit deeper and having some more conversations around how I was feeling, when I had a lot of stuff going on. And, okay, what was the thing that was happening prior to that feeling? What happened during this moment that you're struggling with? And through talking it out with an expert, we were able to identify like social anxiety, like general extreme anxiety, panic attacks. Like, these are all things that I was like, I don't have that. What are you talking about? Like, I'm this, high achiever. I don't have those problems. So, then I had to start working and making some, I guess, plans and strategies to improve that. And I still do. It's not like something that you go and have a couple of sessions with and you're cured. I am someone that's very open and transparent with my own social media and audience, and anyone in my life who knows me. I still have a therapist that I work with every week. And some weeks it's all about my personal life. Other weeks it's all about managing business relationships. Other weeks it's about, how do I manage this feeling that I'm having with these clients? I feel conflicted about this. My views are changing. How do I adapt? Given my whole business model is about this. It's about having a soundboard and somebody to give you tools to learn how to cope with all the things that life throws at us. And it only gets harder the older we get. The more responsibilities, kids, family, bigger business, more company, more staff. It does not get easier. You just have to be able to be flexible and adapt to those changes.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that I'm getting from a lot of the stuff that you're saying is there's a really high degree of personal responsibility. And you said something in the beginning, there's this perception of, it's really easy for me on social media, or for other people. And it's really easy to kind of look at someone and assume that they just got there for whatever reasons, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is, in the vast majority of cases, although obviously there's exceptions, in the vast majority of cases, those people are willing to accept a substantially more responsibility and difficulty and burden and all of these things in order to get there. Because, if you don't take responsibility for your house, it's going to become dirty and it's just not going to be well kept. If you don't take responsibility for your body, it's going to break down. You're going to have pains and injuries and aches, and you're going to have illnesses. For your finance, the same things. And so it's like the burden of doing all of those things and then doing all of those things really well. Like, man, that's tough. That's a lot of work. And so I definitely understand where you're coming from. And I think a lot of people kind of feel the same way. A bit of a disconnect between the realization that, this is just something I feel because I'm here. But if I was rich, then I'd feel different. It's like, no, if you were rich, you'd feel the exact same way. Your problems would just be a lot bigger. Instead of, freaking out over, like, I don't know, how to make rent this month, you'd be freaking out over how to expand your business by X amount this year or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Like, I have been and lived at every spectrum of, I guess, financial wealth. I've been somebody that was struggling to make payment on credit cards, when I was in my late teens, to not having any credit cards, but then, feeling stressed out of my mind because I couldn't improve and grow at the speed that I wanted to a place where, we've been able to, scale our companies and build and develop new companies and, live in our dream home and have the things that make life more convenient. And I will say, the more, I guess, financially wealthy a person becomes, the stress is relative to the individual. And I think one of the hardest things is that as you move up in wealth and success, you have to start learning how to delegate more. And I think for me, that was one of the hardest things I had to overcome from a business standpoint, was giving up control. And again, thinking back to some of those characteristics that kind of closely align with, like, perfectionists and high achievers. It's usually they feel comfortable and confident when they are in charge, when they're driving the ship, and having to be able to say, hey, you know what, I actually trust you to do this job and to do it as well as me, or maybe be okay with it not being done as well as you might do it, but know that it will get done. And then it's up to you to be the person that does, the interview process and asks the right questions and, makes those good hires and have hard conversations if things aren't working. And I think the delegating part just increases the amount of communication that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. So, I think about the number of people that I'm communicating with in a single day. Now we have, I guess, a nanny, a personal assistant, an executive assistant, a team manager. We have several business advisors, 7 business partners in total, and then all the staff that go beyond that. We've got kids, school teachers. It's like insane.
And I would assume you're still probably really, really, really freaking busy on top of all of that.
Right, and then you still have your personal goals. Like I've got a bodybuilding show in less than 2 weeks. I'm getting on stage, so it's like So you just have to be a good communicator. I think that's one of the skills that I grew up not having. I think my childhood looked like, I guess, a father who was a very hard worker, but a non-communicator. Didn't speak to us, did not give like the normal kind of fatherly, positive influence. And then you see how your parents communicate. And I didn't really see them communicate. It was usually arguing. And that's kind of what I thought was the normal, or there was no communication at all. So I think like learning to communicate effectively with lots of different personality types, and knowing how to set boundaries, learning how to say no, and instead of avoid difficult situations, and instead of avoidant coping, like learn how to, active cope. And there's a whole, workbook and tasks that you can do to learn how to improve those types of struggles, which I think, the busier you are, that's the type of thing that you have to be really good at. So, yeah, communication style is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. So I remember maybe like about a year ago, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was just so busy because I work quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I love what I do, so it's kind of like it's simultaneously a creative outlet, but also my job.
Mm-hmm.
So that sometimes gets a little difficult to balance because well, I'm sure you know, but and I was talking to my friend, and I was like, man, I'm just really running up into some serious time constraints. And he was like, oh, what's going on? And he's like, well, what's taking up all your time? And I was like, man, this. And he's like, do you enjoy those things? And I was like, no. And he's like, then just stop doing them. He's like, is that going to affect your bottom line? And I was like, no. So a great example was on this podcast, I used to do timestamps, right? And I would have to go back and watch not watch the whole thing, but I'd like have to skip through all of it and find the exact points where I'd be asking these questions,
Mm-hmm.
And that took me about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I hated doing it. I absolutely hated doing it. And he was just like, has anyone asked you to do that? And I was like, well, no, every time I do something, I like to be very thorough with it. And I'm like, this is what the kind of content that I wished I had, so it's easy to navigate and blah, blah, blah. He's like, okay, well, do you think people complain? And I was like, maybe a couple. And so he's like, then stop doing it. So I stopped doing it. And then I just started kind of looking at all these other things that I was doing that didn't really need to be done. And I just started hacking it. And since then, I have had 2 people on my YouTube channel be like, hey, you should do timestamps. But I've just explained to them, I was like, hey, you know what? I was doing that, but it was extremely consuming. And because this is free, I really have to be, considerate about how I dedicate my time. And they're like, oh, that kind of sucks. But it's like, so what? You know what I mean? Like, I'm able to now continue doing the podcast. I'm able to do all of the other stuff. And I think those conversations are really important. And so, like, just because you were talking about kind of delegating and really prioritizing things. Mm-hmm. And I guess this kind of leads me into another question. In terms of, like, pursuing goals, like, what are some of the common distortions that people have regarding goal pursuit, especially that you hear from clients, and what sort of advice would you have for them?
So are you referring to goals as in like physique improvement, like realistic body goals, or are we talking like business?
We could do it. We could do everything. I guess we'll kind of couch it in fitness, and then just feel free to go and use whatever sort of analogies or other examples you feel are pertinent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I can probably just draw upon clients that I work with. So many people have this idea that their dream or their ideal physique is only going to take them, a very short amount of time. And look, I laugh as I say this, but it's also about, my job, and the reason that I do what I do is because I am passionate about it, and I'm sure you are too. So I try to educate people, and I think once people develop that, basic level nutrition training background, it kind of opens their eyes a little bit more to, the realism of what they're wanting to achieve. So, I've had plenty of people send me, their picture of their ideal. Some clients that I've started working with have said, oh, I'd love to look like you. And I'm like, oh, that's, super flattering. And then, they've said, oh, well, can we do a 12-week program working together? And I've kind of had to say, well, I love your enthusiasm. I'm very flattered, but So I started training and doing this back in, 2013. I was lifting, and I didn't get on stage until 2015. And then to where I am now, that's taken me 4 or 5, cycles of reverse dieting, maintaining my weight, then cutting, then reversing or building. It's a year-long, multiple year-long process. So I think kind of breaking it down for people, and I love forecasting. We have a really cool, sheets that we use with our BioLane coaches that shows a client, here's week 1, and then, after 24 weeks, if we do or implement, this fat loss program with this many diet breaks, and we're achieving a weekly rate of weight loss of 1 pound, per week, here's what the end goal would look like. And then I can forecast another 12 months for them and say, hey, let's say we do this many months of building. Here's, based on what the research says, you can acquire X amount of weight in, fat-free mass over an 8-week period. This is what you're likely to accomplish. So here's your reality for you, and just to kind of put things in perspective. And I think that really helps. It's like giving people facts, and then kind of proof is in the pudding. You've got examples to show. And then having that kind of guided timeline kind of helps them stay committed. At least we're breaking it down into individual blocks where it's like, okay, I know exactly what to expect for 12 weeks. Then I know what the next 12 weeks is going to look like. I can plan my holidays. I can plan, planning, I think, gives people ease of mind. So yeah, I'd say education first and foremost, and then forecasting is super helpful to put those goals in perspective.
Mm-hmm. And how often are you having conversations with your clients? Because I find that even, you'll have a conversation with them, and then they're going great for a little bit, and then all of a sudden they start taking a left turn, and you're like, whoa, you remember when we had that conversation? They're like, what? I didn't know that. And you're like,
yeah. Yeah, I think
in the video that it's recorded in your check-in right here. It's documented, So it's like these are like multiple conversations you have to have on an ongoing basis, because a lot of this stuff is ingrained. And so how do you find that sort of process occurs? Like, do you have I would imagine you have, touch points with your clients where you're kind of communicating them either on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis, something like that. So what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, I put myself in their shoes. I think back to, okay, when I was in their position, however many years ago that was. So I have to have baseline appreciation and understanding of where they're coming from. And that always makes the conversation go a little bit easier. And then at the end of the day, you are the expert. Like, they're coming to me, they're coming to you as a coach to get that advice and to help them stay accountable. So I think I can talk to this from the perspective of being in clinical as a dietitian. And so in the hospital setting, you are, referred patients. You might get one visit with them and it's 30 minutes, and then, their follow-up appointment isn't for another 6 weeks. And what I found was that a lot of folks don't show up to their follow-ups, and they just really fall off the wagon between that 6-week time frame. So one of the things I really didn't enjoy about clinical was the infrequency of conversations and connection, and just the lack of people's efforts. They weren't really that committed. So after stepping out for private practice, and I no longer use, or we don't as a company go through the healthcare system. It is all out of pocket. Like, this is people that really do want to make an effort, that are committed to changing their lives. They're not necessarily focused on, getting it compensated, or, I think they are really there for a reason. And that's one of the reasons I think when I first started, I never really wanted to discount my prices. I didn't want to do things for free, because I've been in a position myself where if you're given something for free, you don't really have the same appreciation or value for it. So I've always had the idea that if somebody is willing to and committed to change, that they are prepared to, there's a cost, there's a sacrifice, there's an expense with that. So from outside of the pricing stuff, I think the regular communication that we now have integrated into our coaching system, which is weekly. And it's all done via video, so we can kind of communicate and connect with our clients anywhere in the world, but we're getting that face-to-face time. It helps, I guess, with that accountability. And I think also having all of the data, like there is so many things that we collect from our clients to kind of point out, here's this, here's that, and to just redirect people when they feel or seem to be going off course. I've got a couple of clients that I still work with today who I've had for probably a couple of years now. And I feel like they actually have a lot of knowledge, although they probably don't say that they feel like that. But when you hear them then discussing with somebody else, wow, you've actually learned quite a bit. But you'll have people all the time kind of change goals.
Hey?
Hey?
I said that's always such a huge compliment. Like when you can sort of like, when you can tell like which lifters are coached by X person because of their like technical precision, or when you can tell like, you know, by the way people are communicating, you're like, oh, are you coached by so-and-so? They're like, yeah. And you're like, yes.
Yeah. So I think, they, at the end of the day, the clients are there for, the expert to keep them accountable. So I have had so many conversations where I've had to say to somebody, look, I really understand. It seems to me like your priorities are, based on what I'm hearing from you, is that you want to maintain a lean physique. But I'm also hearing that you want to be able to do, more socializing and have the flexibility to eat out several days a week. You'd like to have the flexibility to do different sports, taekwondo, for instance, or do more running. And then I hear that you also want to improve your glute size and build your shoulders. So I kind of you have to identify all of those like conflicting goals and explain, hey, if you want to do this, you can, but the reality of this situation is that thing that you want to do over here, all that running and, reducing your resistance training minutes to do more taekwondo, or if you want to go out and not track and use a food scale, there are all these variables that are changing and you're not going to be able to maintain, this level of leanness. Or if you want to build your glutes and your shoulders, there is going to be a point where you have to be okay with adding a little bit of body fat. You can recomp until the cows come home, and it's going to take you a heck of a lot longer. So it's just pointing out the facts, being real, again, really explaining in depth where conflicts are, showing up and, what that would look like. So, yeah, I really like to kind of paint the picture. Here's what you're asking for, but here's how that's not going to work for whatever the goal might be. So, yeah.
No, I definitely think that's a really important aspect as well. And I also think that the video communication is a really, really critical piece. People need to see your face. They need to know that you're like, so that's something that I do as well. Like I'll go over the check-in form, whatever, but I'm recording myself going over it, and it's like, do I need to do that? No. But for them, it's like now they actually see you. I'm not sure if you do like an actual call or if you do that or whatever, but it's like either way, they're actually seeing you. They're talking to you. They feel like there's a sense of relatedness. So that and the education piece gives them that feeling of competency, and then it builds their self-efficacy. And so there's all these things kind of collectively coming together. And that is definitely one of the most important things of a coach. Like I always tell people, so I don't write programs for people. If someone comes and like, hey, I just want a program, I'm like, no, not your guy. Sorry. Because it's like, that's not coaching, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just like, you're going to waste a lot of money when you could just go get a free program off of the internet. And I think a lot of the times people don't necessarily understand the difference between coaching and like, they're sort of like the commonly held perspective of what a coach or PT or whatever actually does. It's like, oh, they count reps, they teach you good form and help you out yourself. And it's like, that's like about 7% of what you're doing. You know what I mean?
It's funny. I actually have had that conversation many times about, dietitians. So I guess the role of a dietitian, for instance, most people just go, oh yeah, weight loss. But, we have such a diverse breadth of expertise. It's like we work in, renal and hepatic wards with, very sick patients in the clinical setting. We have the oncology wards. We work with cardiothoracic, gastroenterology. There's so many different facets. And I think to your point, it just comes back to education. I always say, like, knowledge is power. So yeah, I think one of the things that I remember struggling with when I used to do it, like I was doing PT as well. So I do kind of half my day in the gym setting with clients, and then I would move into the practice where I'm kind of sit down, face to face. But it really comes down to, like, hey, I could write a program for you, but here's why it's not this is not optimal, and here's why. If you do X, Y, Z, this would be better. But so you've just got to make people aware, and that the decision's on them, right? So you kind of have explained their options, and they can make an informed choice.
Yeah, and so much of that is really just the soft skills of coaching. Like, I've always found that probably one of my biggest strengths as a coach is just communication, right? Like, I'm a writer, I'm in education. That's predominantly what I do for work. So I have to be very clear at communicating. And I've looked at other coaches where I'm like, man, yeah, like, I look up to this person, and I mean, their level versus my level is just such a huge gap, Yeah. And but I think there's a lot that you can do just by being, exactly like you were saying, educating your clients and being a good communicator, because you can get better buy-in. So, let's say coach X is implementing 5 different strategies, and they're all like really, really highly optimized, whereas you're only implementing 2. But the amount that you're able to get out of them is so much higher because you have that relationship, you have that communication. They really are understanding it. They're really taking ownership, and yeah. So, I mean, I think that's such a critical component. And the side of coaching that I think people don't really realize is that it basically is mentorship. You're learning, you're gaining all of this wisdom, this understanding. And I mean, there's a lot of times where I'll hear people say, like, oh, I already know that. And it's like, no, you don't know that, or else you'd be doing it. You just have a conceptual understanding of it. And there's a big difference between that versus like lived experience. And so how do you go through that process, I guess, of iterating a client's program based on some of the changes that are actually happening? Like, what kind of conversation are you having with them around that?
Goodness, I feel like, for the most part, we have such a thorough process with our coaching team that it's hard to miss parts. So right down from like the onboarding system, we actually, I guess, have a couple of platforms that we use. So clients will receive a login to a portal. They get access to all their work documents. They have access to all of their invoicing and past forms that they've completed. And it's like a one-stop shop. It's a hub. And then I guess there is so much communication in that initial video. So we really try to go out of our way to explain, here's what your, program is going to kind of look like based on the information and the feedback that I've got from you. But I think we also really make a point to discuss the likeliness of interruption and stresses and potential things that are going to pop up that conflict with their goals. Managing somebody's expectations around fat loss if they have, a history of dieting, under eating, excessive exercise. We can say, hey, look, on paper, this is what it looks like. But the reality is we can't forecast or predict exactly how your metabolism and as an individual is going to respond to the, what the math of the average person might say. So I think, setting clear expectations and then continuing to, reassess, reevaluate. And I've also gotten to the point personally where the people that I work with, I'm primarily working with them to learn, I guess, to be realistic, to slow down, to stop rushing the process, of fat loss and or muscle building, to understand that this stuff just takes time. And, especially for the high end, like very elite people that we tend to work with, their lifestyles are incredibly busy. So it's helping them like manage their expectations and be able to pivot when they need to pivot. And it's constant like assessment, reevaluate. assessment, reevaluate, change goals altogether, or put a pause on this goal, and we might need to divot back this way because you've got a big, stage performance and you need to shrink and it's a last minute thing. So yeah, I don't know whether I've interpreted your question correctly, but I would say that there's just constant communication and, just setting clear expectations and not being afraid to have the hard conversations. I think people often need that, and I've definitely grown the skills of saying what needs to be said in a positive yet firm fashion.
Yeah, no, that I completely agree. And so you brought something up actually that I think is also really important, is there are probably going to be times for most people where you do have to sort of regress, but it's an intentional regression based on changing life circumstances.
Yeah.
So when you're approaching those conversations, that's obviously going to be something that's really difficult for some people to accept, because it's like, man, I've been working so hard. Now you're asking me to intentionally regress. Like, that's a real mindfuck for a lot of people.
Yes.
Like even me right now, so I'm going through a diet, right? Because I had a head injury a little while ago, and basically I can't lift super heavy for the time being, and so I'm doing like some bodybuilding. I'm losing weight. I weigh 260 right now. I haven't weighed 260 in like 6 years. This is the lightest I've been, and I'll probably have to get to like 240. And on the one hand, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. Like I'm getting quite a bit leaner, but then at the same time, I'm like, all my clothes are super baggy. Like, moo now when I just put on a normal t-shirt. So it's a little bit of a battle. I mean, and so how do you navigate that conversation, and how do you sort of like deprioritize one thing while kind of shifting the focus to something else for that time, so they still have something to kind of work towards during those kind of difficult or sort of tumultuous periods?
Yeah, for sure. Gosh, I would be lying if I didn't say every single person I've ever worked with has had at least one or two oh my god moment, what's going on during their coaching phase. Look, life happens, and I think I'm very much a realist, and from the get-go, as soon as I'm working with a client, like in addition to their physical goal and their health goal, whether it's muscle building or fat loss or metabolic restoration, you name it, I really try to be as conscious of the mindset as I am the implementation of their nutrition program and training. So I would say I probably spend 50% of the time talking to my clients around psychology. So it is identifying, limiting beliefs, identifying potential stresses, identifying, some emotional distress for that individual. And I somehow strip it out of them, and then we find like solutions for that. I'm very solution focused. You vent and you share a problem with me. I, one, will empathize if it's something that's challenging, but then two, it's okay. Yes, this is difficult for whatever it is, but we need to find a solution rather than just complain about it, because complaining will lead us to nowhere, and it's time wasted. So yeah, I really do spend a good amount of time working on mindset, shifting people towards that positive, mind state, as opposed to being, the negative, the glass is half empty type person. And that really tends to make that whole experience a little bit easier, because most of the time there's nothing you can do about it. You can control the variables you can control, and the ones that you can't, you just got to let it go. And I think the people that end up struggling the most, and I have been that person in my physique goals and bodybuilding, I've had to pull out of show before, devastating. It's like, oh my God, I've done 18 weeks of work. What the heck? And I have to just give it all away. Like, there are going to be points in your life, whether it's in your sport, whether it's in your business, relationships, friendships, that things aren't going to go the way that you planned for them to go. But the quicker you are at being able to manage those emotions, to cope with them and to let go, or at least be at peace with them, or be neutral, like have a neutral response to something that's not great, the easier it is going to be for you. My husband, he always says to me, like, gee, you're probably more on the non-empathetic side. And I think I've just had to say to him, no, don't mistake my silence or my, not spending a lot of time, being negative about this thing for not being someone that is caring, or that it doesn't feel a certain way to me. I'm just like analyzing, assessing myself, deciding what can and cannot be done, and then I try my best to not waste any time on things that are out of my control. And for me, that has been like the one most important thing that has helped, grow as an individual, and it has shown in every aspect of my life, like friendships, business, financial. So yeah, that's kind of how I navigate it. It's very much a nutrition coaching, program one-on-one, but it's also very, the psychology involved, or psychology heavy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely an incredibly important skill. And I mean, I think, as you start seeing your clients kind of coming up with these solutions, or starting to, I don't want to say starting to sound like you, but you know what I mean? But sort of like their responses, you're like, hey, you're getting it. Like, that's awesome. It's such a huge win, because that's more of like an internalized sort of behavioral value structure than it is just like a, hey, I lost 1.5 pounds this week, or whatever it might be, right? So I think that's more of a long-term win for sure. So that's awesome. So I want to be considerate of your time, because we are kind of coming to the hour mark. Do you have any sort of like closing remarks, or anything that you think would be pertinent to share to individuals to kind of establish balance and have a little bit more of a balanced and sort of adaptive approach on their fitness journey, or whatever it is they're on?
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I haven't really, well, actually, there's lots of things I haven't talked about, but let's stick to the point. I think avoid playing the comparison game. It's so easy to get totally sucked into all the wrong things. I've made that mistake. I am very aware of these mistakes, and I still do them today, but I'm very quick to catch myself and stop that type of behavior. And I think for most people that are coming and seeking nutrition coaching or training, programming, whatever the case, there's usually a big goal in mind, and I think that's fantastic. But one of the things that all of us tend to do at times is really over focus on where somebody else is, or why can't I be at that place, or look at their calories, or what about their training, is that better than what I'm doing? And I would say, like, try to really focus on yourself. Stop looking around, again, focus on the things that you can control, and let go of the things that you cannot. And, I think upping or upskilling your nutrition education by hiring an evidence-based coach, somebody that, takes the time, that nurtures that relationship, that has that, intimate connection, how you described, Daniel, you're doing video consults. Like, that is such an important piece, I think, of developing, a good relationship. And that is when, you really start to see clients flourish and, have awesome outcomes. It is the coaches or people that aren't doing their due diligence in, where is their knowledge stemming from? What's this coming from? Is it personal experience? Did they just look good, but they've got no idea how they look that good? I think it's very easy to jump to the next, Miss Olympia, or go and, start working with this bodybuilding coach, and, they're totally a bro. They don't have any background, or they're not aware of certain things that influence someone's ability to make progress. So do due diligence on, your coaching coaches, where they're getting their information from, and be open to learn, and be open to change. Maybe you're, very biased towards a particular style of diet. I've had clients that are like, I am definitely a keto. Like, there's no way, I don't need carbs. I feel so much better. And I'm like, really? Okay. Let's just test that. So, I think be open to learn, drop the guard, take down those biases. And I think, if you can do all those things and you are following science, you will get results. So, yeah, I think that's probably where I would finish.
Awesome. No, I think that's fantastic advice. It's really practical and it's actionable. So where can people find you, Holly?
Absolutely. I think everything is available on my Instagram page, which is just Holly T Baxter. We've got links to our nutrition coaching apps, all the things, all the books, all the education. It's all there.
Awesome. So I'm going to put that up in the show notes, guys. Definitely make sure you go give her a follow. She puts out tons of great content on a regular basis. And as she just mentioned, they're doing a lot of really cool stuff behind the scenes as well. So Holly, thank you so much for jumping on the call. It's been really, really awesome having you here.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.